small person, sometimes a smallish voice. Do you think I should use the mic to talk to you guys, or can you all hear?
I can hear.
Okay, good. Eddie, I stole one of these in the back the last week. Have they been going through the growing as a worker part already? Or is that are we skipping ahead or what?
That's in the self-read section.
The self-read
Most
section.
people don't read it all.
Okay, who's read the growing as a worker section? It's actually really good. I'm very impressed. So yeah, I'll just share a little bit of, I'm just going to tell stories. I'm kind of a storyteller person. I've got some scripture to kind of throw in there. But so I work right now as a midwife. Does anyone know what a midwife is? Anyone? I've seen a couple. There's 2 people that know. 3, 4, okay. So I help moms that are pregnant or getting ready to be pregnant or have just had babies or are having babies. So last night I was on call at the hospital, and by the time I left there was a baby about to be born, but missed it by a couple hours. But anyway, I work with a team of 9 other midwives. We're mostly at Swedish Hospital where we attend births, and then I have clinics out in the neighborhoods. And it's really fun because my particular practice works a lot with immigrants and refugees. So almost none of my patients are native-born Americans, which is kind of fun. They're mostly African. I have a lot of Somali and Ethiopian and quite a number of Vietnamese, and anyway, just kind of from all over the map, so it's super fun. But yeah, when Eddie asked me to talking about doing this whole thing on vocation and living out your calling and your identity in the workplace, so I was just man, there's a lot I could say about that, and where do I start? And I felt like I wanted to just kind of give you guys just a lot of my life story. So I've kind of had this interesting, circuitous route with God of being at a very young age having a really strong sense of what my calling was supposed to be, and then just pursuing it hardcore for literally 20 years, never wavering, just after it with everything. I was kind of the poster child for someone who had a strong sense of call in their life and was passionate about it, whatever. And then you'll hear that in the story later. It all turned out so different than I expected, and just the way God kind of brought. He kind of saved me from allowing my calling to become my identity. Does that make sense? Sometimes when you have a really strong sense of call, that becomes this is who this person is. But God knows that that's a trap that eventually will bring death in your life, or will bring idolatry in your life, or something that you will be serving that thing instead of it serving you. And anyways, so it's going to be kind of a long story, but are you guys ready to bear with me a little bit? I got a thumbs up. That's good. I like that. Okay. Let me just pray first. God, I'm just super honored to be here right now. It's really a privilege. I just have been feeling your heart for every young man and young woman in this room for a while now. I'm just so excited for what you have for them. God, I love the story we get to walk out with you. I'm so grateful that mine isn't turning out anything like what I expected. God, thank you for your grace and your mercy in the midst of all of that. Thank you that you see the big, big, big picture. Thank you in advance for the places and the people that you have for each one in this room to influence and love in the future. And Lord, I just ask if there's anything in my story that would be helpful, that you would guide what I say, that you would lead the direction. There's so many different things, so many different places I could go, but I really want you to give these men and women what they need from me today. So come take over, come sit with us in this room. You already are. We honor you. We honor you. And you honor us. Thank you in Jesus' name, amen. So my story with faith, I grew up in a big family of 6 kids. Does anyone come from a big family in here? Anyone? Yeah. Usually I'm totally the weirdo in the group who has 6 kids in their family more. People always asked us when we were growing up, so does that mean, are you Catholic or Mormon? Neither. We're just Americans. And people are what? How do you have 6 kids? But big family. My parents live out in Snohomish, and both my parents are believers. They raised all of us in the faith, which I'm so grateful for. I think my parents said I asked Jesus into my heart when I was like 3, which I have a very vague memory of, but I believe it happened in real life. And then when I was 8 years old is when kind of my story of my faith really became my own started. So what happened was I actually got really sick that year. Started in like January, and I just had this like constant chronic pain in my gut that would just never go away, and I was super tired all the time, and it ended up lasting for 8 total months of just being sick all the time. So I'm the second born at the time there was 5 of us, and my mom was pregnant with the 6th, and busy family, a lot going on. But everyone was super worried about me. I was going to the hospital for all kinds of advanced testing, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. It's like I had every test in the book: CAT scan, X-ray, MRI, ultrasound, like everything. They're like trying to find, does this kid have cancer? Like, what is causing her to be so sick? And they could never diagnose it. But it was during that time of just like being laid out on the couch and just like super sad and tired and hurting all the time that like my relationship with God really kind of took on its own thing. So my siblings would they'd pray for me every night at dinner, like, God, please help Jenny to be better, And so we always believed that God could heal me. And so I have we're doing all this stuff with the doctors, we're trying to find medications and treatments, and nothing's working. So we're just kind of stuck with prayer, you know what I mean? We're praying the whole time anyways, but it's just like, okay, God. But for me, it was like, okay, God, nobody understands what's happening to me, but somehow I think you do. And I really need you to just, I need you to heal my body. I just trust that you're going to do it. But just him being present with me in the midst of something that was so hard and painful, it's just it really made my faith come alive. It was really cool because even in that waiting time of all those months, I just was hungry for him. And instead of just being Bible stories or songs that we sang or whatever, it's he just became legit, this has to be real for me right now. So about 6 months into that journey of being sick, I woke up in the middle of the night. It's 1:30 a.m. And I was just in so much pain. And I didn't want to go wake up my parents again because there's nothing they can do. They're like, here's Tylenol, whatever. They can't fix it, right? And so I'm just what do I do? So I'm crying out to God, and I'm like, God, what is this? We've been praying for 6 months for you to make me better. Are you even listening? Do you have my back or not? Are you going to heal me or not? I need to know that you're with me right now because I'm just in a lot of pain. I'm just really frustrated. I was crying, angry tears in my pillow, trying not to wake up my sister in the bed next to me. And all of a sudden, I look up and I see this angel, a for real angel, floor to ceiling, standing by my bed. And it speaks to me and says, Jenny Rose, God wants you to know that he's heard your prayer and he's going to heal you in his time. But right now you need to wait on him. Wait for him. He is going to heal you, and he's with you. So it's kind of a crazy thing, right? But it actually happened. And I was so overwhelmed by it. The next day I told my brothers and sisters and told my mom I'd had this experience. And this cool thing was that the impact of it for me was not as much that I had seen an actual angel, but that God cared enough about a skinny, small for her age, super shy little girl that lived in Tacoma, Washington, and cared enough about me to send a message that strong. It was overwhelming, right? If God loves me that much, then it demands some kind of response from me. I have to respond to this somehow. So over the next couple of weeks, it was just mulling over this experience in my mind, and I'm still in pain, still stuff going on, but I was at church a couple weeks later on a Sunday night. And I remember it was yesterday. I went up to the front after the service was over. I don't know why I was in adult church instead of kids church or whatever, but I just went up to the front afterwards and asked one of the elders to pray for me. And he's like, oh, do you want me to pray about your health? Because everyone knew I was going through this thing with my stomach. And I was like, no, God's got that one handled, evidently. I don't need prayer for that. But I was like, I just want more of the Holy Spirit. I don't know what possessed me to say that at 8 years old, but that was legitimately what I said. I said, I want more of the Holy Spirit. So the guy's like, okay. So he prays for me for more of the Holy Spirit, and the next thing I know, I'm so overwhelmed with the presence of the love of God that I was just on my face crying. Little kid, this big, just crying. And I was just like, God, you can have me. you can have me. I'm just little, I'm just a kid. My body isn't even working right, but my whole life is yours. Just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it, whatever you say. My life is just yours. And crystal clear, he spoke to me and said, Jenny Rose, when you grow up, I want you to be a missionary in China. And that's what he said, and I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do then. So I leave that experience, I'm just overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, what do I know about China? I know where it is on the map from 3rd grade geography, and that's all I know. And so I remember telling my parents that night, like, guess what? God called me to be a missionary to China tonight. And like, I cannot even tell you guys how timid I was as a little kid. So shy. Out of all the kids in the family, I was the quiet one. It's hard to imagine right now. I was the quiet one. And it's like, I was so homesick, I couldn't stand to be away from my mom overnight, even by then. It was like, I couldn't even go to my grandma's house without crying at night because I was like homesick and like so timid. So they're like, a missionary in China, huh? But they were so sweet about it, like, great, like we'll see what happens with that, But I was for serious. I was going to be a missionary in China, and there was nothing that was going to turn me around because I said my life was his. And he told me to go to China, and from that point I was like, I'm going to live in China till I'm 80. And I'm going to be like spending my whole life just like serving the people of China, whatever that looks like. And I was just like starry-eyed for China. Like, no one I even knew had ever been there before. It was just like, I started reading all these biographies. I was reading about Gladys Aylward and Hudson Taylor and Brother Andrew and all these people that had served in China. And then, I just was like, I'd go to the library and like beeline straight for I'd get all the photo books out and look at all these pictures of ancient civilization in China. And just like, I became the weirdest kid I know, you guys, because I was just like obsessed with this idea of going to this country. And it was such a weird, like in that context, like I would tell all these adults and stuff, like that I'm going to be a missionary in China when I grow up, and they're like, oh, like normally people are missionaries in like South America or Africa, but at that time, like I didn't know a whole lot of people that were in the missions movement in China, because especially then, it was like China was pretty close to Westerners. Anyways, so then 2 months later, this one day, my sickness just left, just as strangely did it come. No one ever diagnosed it, no one ever figured out a treatment, but God just was faithful to his word and took it away. So he healed me. Yay. And then around the same time that happened, my mom was going into labor with her 6th baby, my baby sister. And she actually, by this time I had turned 9, I was really moving up, right? So she invited me and my older sister to come and be there for the birth. And I was so excited about it. By this time I'd been in and out of hospitals so much for all this testing that it was just like, this sounded really cool to me. My older sister, she was 11, and she's like standing in the corner watching my mom in all this pain, and she's like feeling nauseous, trying not to throw up. And I'm like in it. I'm like, this is amazing. And my dad's like coaching her through, and I'm like running my fingers through her hair and bringing her water to drink, and just like, this little 9-year-old kid, I'm like, wow. And so after the whole process, this friend of ours who was there was just like, Jenny Rose, have you ever thought about being a nurse? You'd be really good at it. And I was like, a nurse. That would go perfectly with China. And it was like, from that point on, it just felt like God was calling me to be a nurse missionary in China, and that's what I was doing, for sure. There was nothing going to hold me back. So when I was 13, I went on my first mission trip to China. I was with Youth with a Mission, King's Kids. Have you heard of YWAM before? There's no YWAM. A couple of people are nodding their heads. It's a huge missions organization. But I went on this little 2-week trip to Hainan Island. Anyone ever been to Hainan Island? It's so pretty. It's a really beautiful place. But so that was 1999. I'm 13, and I'm there. And I was so dramatic, you guys. Like, we're leaving after 2 weeks there, and I'm like, I'm leaving my heart in China. I was like, just so excited to come back someday. But just like, I was just like, this is it. Like, I'm just so alive in this context. But it was cool because along the process, like even that trip when I was 13, I had those moments where I'm just like, what did I just say I was going to do? I'm going to go on this trip. What if people ask me questions and I don't know what to say, and I don't know the language, and I don't feel like I'm good enough or smart enough? And God's like, you're 13. I was like, all this pressure of like, I'm supposed to save China. And so, anyways, it was really sweet. But I had this like special time there when I was 13. And then every year after that, I was invited back for these different missions trips. And like, I always wanted to go, and I tell my parents, like, I feel like I'm supposed to go on this trip. And they're like, actually, we don't feel that way, so you're staying home. I'm like, wow. So every year, I was just like dying to get back. I was like, the other day, I was going through old like I'm getting ready to move, so I was going through all the old papers and stuff, and I found this little support letter that I wrote for my 13-year-old trip, and I'm just like, I've been praying for China for 5 years, like for like most of my life, you know? So it's really sweet. All these people sent me there. But so then I go back. The next time I was able to go back was when I was 19. I was my sophomore year at SPU. And again, like I only applied to one school. It's like I applied to SPU because they had a good nursing program. There was a prayer movement going on that my sister was a part of that was super cool. I wanted to be a part of it. And they had a study abroad option in China. I was like, that's it, done. That's where I'm going to go. So I'm on the study abroad in China. And for me, it's all like, you know, I'm supposed to be studying like Chinese history and Chinese language and all this stuff, which I knew I was going to do. But like inwardly, it's like the next step towards my mission. You know, it's just like I was so excited about it. But while I was there, I was like, okay, God, so it's been great to know at this point for more than 10 years that I'm supposed to be working in China. But China's kind of a big place, right? It's like a lot of different cultures, and it's like a really big place. So also nursing can look like anything. So do you want to be more specific about that? And while I was there, he started really highlighting Tibet and Western China. And it was crazy. Like I would meet someone that was from Tibet, and like my heart rate would jump when I found out they're from Tibet. And I'm like, what is happening? I don't know anything about this place. And then after that started happening, I was like, is this you, God? Are you saying something about Western China? We went to this orphanage. I was over, at this time I was in Fujian province in a city called Xiamen. And 你知道吗? It's really beautiful there. So I was there for the study abroad, and so God's speaking to me about Western China, and then we go on this like just this service day and this trip to an orphanage, and there's like 11 of these kids that just like stood out to me from all the rest of the kids. It's like I couldn't take my eyes off them. There was something so beautiful to me about these kids, and it turned out they were all from Tibet, and I was like, oh, so God, you are saying something about that. And it was just kind of like when I was 8, and I was like, great, I don't know anything about it except for where it is on a map, but I'm in, you know, so I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm going to go to Tibet eventually. So I come back from that trip, and I'm telling everyone, like, apparently I'm going to be in Tibet. That's the next step that God showed me. I'm going to be working over there. And so I start learning about it, and then I'm hearing all these, like, horror stories about people that have gone to Tibet and never came back, and like it's just like people are like, it's the most dark and oppressive place I've ever been to or heard of. People in those words, like it's like a missionary graveyard. It's like Satan's throne. Like people say, like it's so intense there, like the Tibetan Buddhism. And I was like hearing about how cold it is, like 8 months out of the year, it's like freezing. And, you know, the altitude is really high, and people get altitude sickness and have to come home, and, like, all these health issues. And I'm also discovering, like, the maternal or the neonatal mortality rate there is, like, 25-30%. At this point, I was pretty sure I wanted to do obstetric nursing, and so I was looking into that and thinking about becoming a midwife. But I was just like, oh, okay. So I came back from that time. About 6 months later, I was at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. Do you guys know about that ministry? I have. Anyone? So I did an internship there called Fire in the Night. You guys know about that? Fire in the Night? Everyone heard that? It's cool. But it's this internship where you go and you're in this prayer room from midnight to 6 in the morning every night. And then you go to sleep during the daytime, and then you take classes in the evening about intimacy with God and all kinds of different things. It was cool way to spend a summer. But I initially went there because I was like, I'm going to go and like intercede for China and Tibet for like 3 months and then see what God does. And but during this time, I'm also hearing all these stories about how scary Tibet is. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like super lucky to be called to China. I kind of felt like God was like banishing me to like the most spiritually, physically, geographically, and socially isolated place I'd ever heard of. It's like, great. That's intense. So I was like really wrestling with that calling. And I think that always happens. Like God always brings you to a place where whatever he puts on your heart to do, it just feels like way too big for you. And that's kind of how you know it's him, right? It's just way too big for you, way beyond what you can do in your own strength. But like I had this like sense of, such a sense of mission about it. and like calling, and it just felt like I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on myself. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm from a family of 6 kids. I didn't tell you that 5 of those kids are girls. So imagine growing up in a family of 5 girls and 1 boy, and we do tea parties, like legit tea parties. We like to dress up and be fancy and curl our hair and sit down and have tea. And I'm like, I'm the tea party girl from a family of 5 kids. Tibet sounds like hardcore rugged, and I don't feel like I'm a rugged person. So like, I don't know if you picked the wrong person here, but like doing the whole like mountains and altitude and like super isolated and like all these, like I'm reading stories about people like for 200 years there's been like missionaries trying to like penetrate, and there's like literally 10 Tibetan believers that they know of like in the whole place, because it's just like so hard, like the ground is so hard there spiritually is what all the stuff that I'm hearing. And so it's just like, I'm super not cut out for this. Like, I'm just not cut out for this. I'm not even supposed to be getting a theology degree. And like going to this place that's so spiritually dark, I don't even know where to begin. Where would I even start having conversations with people like that are so different culturally? And there's all this conflict that I'm learning about between the Tibetan people groups and the Muslim people groups and the Han, Chinese people, and it's just this mess over there. So I'm just like, for the first time in my life, super wrestling with this call. I'm like, you picked the wrong girl, you know? So at the same time this was all happening, I was meeting these people who were inviting me to come back to China that very next summer, including people that were going to be working in Tibet. So I'm like, I have this actual invitation to go there the following summer. And I'm just really, like, I'm not sure if that's God or not. And so I kind of came to this place where I was like, listen, God, when it comes to China, you know that half of me is always dying to be there and half of me is always terrified. So if you want me to go on this trip, you have to like write it in the sky. That's what you got to do, because I don't know how to hear from you on this. I'm too conflicted in my own heart. So the next night, I'm at the house of prayer and I'm in the women's bathroom. Strange things happen in women's bathrooms sometimes. So I'm in the bathroom and this washing my hands, and this girl comes up to me and she's like, hey, are you Jenny Rose? I'm like, yeah, that's me. She goes, I was asking my roommate what your name was. I was like, who's the dark-haired girl that plays the violin sometimes? And they told me that you were Jenny Rose. And she's like, I was looking for you because I had this dream about you last night. I'm like, hi, stranger, what's your name? And she's like, in my dream, it was weird. You were like desperate to go to this Asian country. It was like China or something. And everyone told you that you couldn't go because you didn't have any money, you didn't have any way to get there, and you felt like you didn't have what you needed to go. But you just started, like all these different confirmations started coming that you were supposed to go. So at the end of my dream, you were just getting on this bus and you were like, I just gotta go. And you were just preparing to go to China in my dream. Isn't that weird? And I was like, okay, God, so is that dream about like this particular trip to China or like sometime in the future, you know? And God's like, face palm, like Jenny Rose, which trip have you been specifically asking me to write in the sky about? So I was like, okay, and so then I go into the prayer room. Have you guys heard of someone called Misty Edwards? She's a worship leader. I love her. So I'm walking in the room and she's singing on the stage. And the way they do it at IHOP, they have like this kind of spontaneous singing thing that they do. So she'll be singing something, then there's someone on this prayer mic that's kind of like either studying through scripture or just throwing out different phrases, and then they kind of do this thing back and forth where they're singing, speaking, singing, speaking. So she's on the mic and she goes, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to stay where it's comfortable, or are you going to press on for the fullness and nothing but the fullness of what God has for you? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I'm just in the back and I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then this guy gets on the prayer mic and he's like, but God, there's mountains there. It's so high. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm like, shut up, Misty. Just shut up. Stop singing to me. And so I just make a beeline straight for this little, it was like this room that was set aside to pray for Asia. I spent a lot of time in there at the beginning, and then it was kind of like inching away, like spending less and less time because I was just intimidated. But I go back to the Asia room, and I just sit down, and I'm kind of in this place where I'm like, listen, God, you know that I want to say yes to you with my whole heart. Whatever you ask me to do. I want to say yes to you with my whole heart, no matter how scared I am. But you have to deal with this fear, because it's kind of killing me right now. I want to say yes to you, but I can't because I'm just afraid. I need you to address this fear that I have of going over there. And so sweet, he just spoke to me and he said, Jenny Rose, I know that the thing that you're most afraid of in going is not the altitude, it's not the mountains, it's that you're afraid that you're going to go to a place where the darkness above your head is going to be so thick that you can't find me. And that I'm going to be far from you in this process. And he's like, I want you to look at that map that's on the wall. And China's like, this whole map of Asia, and China's all like highlighted. And he's like, do you realize that that place is the number one thing I have used in your life to teach you about who I am? And to show you who you are. And to teach you about intercession. And about my heart for people that don't know me yet. And about my kingdom. Like, this is the number one thing I've used in your life. This is my chosen journey for you into my heart. Don't despise it. And he said, I know that you're afraid you'll get there. And it'll just be so hard and so intense. But he's like, I want to ask you this. What if you go and you commit to spending your whole life in Tibet, and you never see a single person come to faith because of your ministry? You never see a single person get better because of your nursing skills? What if you never see any fruit whatsoever that people can actually measure? Is it worth it to you to go for a lifetime just because I need friends in Tibet? Just in a place where hardly anyone knows about me and who I am, and they have all these misconceptions. Like, is it worth it to you to go to just push all those things away from my ears for a minute and just be a place of rest for me? Is it worth it to you to go just so you can comfort my heart and see what I see in these people every day, even if there's no fruit? It's like, I'll give you fruit. You leave that up to me, but will you just go and be my friend there? I just need you to be my friend. And that moment was so redefining for me. I said yes, of course. It was like all of a sudden this weight of pressure just fell away. And it was like, that's what I can do, you know? Like, all these other things, like, you know, people, I've been talking about China my whole life, and people, you know, think that I'm going to be some kind of cross between, like, Florence Nightingale and Mulan or something, and, like, save China single-handedly. But it's like, I can't do any of that, right? I know, what am I kidding? Like, I'm just a kid, and my body isn't even working right, and, you know, I'm just little. And he's just like, just be my friend. Like, get rid of all that other pressure. It's not about that. Just be my friend, and that's where all of the fruit's going to flow out of. So that redefined what missions was about for me. It redefined what calling is about for me. And all of a sudden, it just was like, oh my gosh. Like, my destiny and vision and calling in life is you. Just knowing you. Just loving you. And this whole like idea of living in China until I'm 80 or whatever, like that, maybe that's just my assignment. But it's just like way, way, way second place. Like the vision is you. Just knowing you. Just being your friend. And in the context of that, there's a lot of times where I feel like he picked really the wrong person to be his friend. You know what I mean? I'm like, I get really embarrassed sometimes, or I don't always listen, or I don't obey, or like I get distracted. You know, I don't pay attention to you. You know, and I remember hearing a friend of mine who was preaching about this, and she was just saying, she was telling me about this one encounter that she had with God, where it's like he's just speaking to her about like the destinies of nations. You know, she's just like on her face, and he's like, and then, and he just would call her friend every time. He's like, and friend, Russia will da 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 da, and friend, the United States da da da, friend, like all these different, and he just kept calling her friend every time, and finally she just like, stop calling me friend, I'm not your friend, I'm not a good friend to you. Like, it was just like, it was so overwhelming for her to hear God keep calling her friend. It was like she felt like she so didn't deserve that. Like, why would you pick me to be your friend, of all people, you know? And the same thing, she's like, I don't listen to you, I don't obey, like all this same kind of stuff. And then she's like, throws this whole thing out there, like, stop calling me friend, I'm a terrible friend to you. And God's just like, anyway, friend. And he's like, and just keeps speaking to her, you know? But it's just like, God so changed like everything about how I thought about being his and working with him, because it's just like, okay, whether I feel like I'm qualified or not, like if he's asking me to be his friend, I don't have to agree with his decision that it's a good call for him to pick me as his friend. But if I don't say yes, like he's the one that misses out, right? He's the one that doesn't have someone to just sit and cry with him about stuff and laugh with him about stuff. And that's what he wants for me more than anything else. It's like, just, okay, take all the pressure off. So it's really, I felt like it was really important that I just tell you that part of the story, just like the friendship with God picture. So fast forward a couple more years, I did go to Tibet that summer, and I just like, I fell in love with it. My heart really came alive there, and I was just like, okay, I totally love this place. There was definitely hard stuff about it, but I just loved being there with him. Ended up getting adopted by a Hui family. Do you guys know about the Hui people? Huizu? They're like a large Muslim minority in China. There's about 100 million of them. They're one of the biggest unreached people groups in the world, actually. And I had no idea about that. I didn't know anything that there even was Muslims in China, but were Muslims. But anyway, I get adopted by this Muslim family. Like, God starts opening up all these cool things with the story there. That was back in 2006, the first time I went to Tibetan Plateau. And then went back again the next year for a couple more months. Meanwhile, I'm still like in school during the school years and finishing my nursing degree. And then God's like, oh, by the way, you can't go straight to China after you graduate. Like, you kind of got to get some work experience as a nurse under your belt. So I'm like, dang it, I just want to be in China. So I'm like working for 2 years at the University of Washington Medical Center as an OB nurse. And then as soon as I finished my 2 years, I just was like out of there, peacing out. I was wanting to be in China. So I moved there and I started studying Chinese. Knew I had to study Tibetan eventually, but I was like, got to get Chinese down first real fast. So I'm like working on studying Chinese full time. And just loving on this Muslim family. I had literally about 200 Muslims in this huge clan that kind of had adopted me as a daughter by this time. So I'm spending a lot of time with them, and I was actually helping to plant a house of prayer in the capital city there. And so we just met, once a week, and we'd pray, sometimes all through the night, sometimes just for a few hours, here and there, but and usually just a little handful of us, but we were just like in there just asking for God's heart for this place. And let me tell you guys, I loved it. I loved being there. Like, the honeymoon phase didn't stop. Like, I was there for 1.5 years solid, and I just was like, I don't want to leave. But of course, into that time, God's like, so grad school, Jenny Rose. And I'm like, what about grad school? He's like, I want you to apply to grad school, like to become midwife. Remember we talked about this? And I'm like, but that means I have to leave China for like a long time. And he's like, yeah, and also grad school, it could be master's or doctorate. I kind of think you should do the doctorate. It's 3 years. I'm like, no! I was like, 2 years is long enough. Like, do I have to? He's like, just apply to this program. But I was like dragging my feet. I just was like, I love being here so much, and I know that I needed, more education to be more effective in what I wanted to do there long term. But I was just like, it was just really hard for me to think about leaving because I was like, I've been waiting my whole life to be here and actually get to like dig into the language and actually love these people in tangible ways. Like, I just loved it so much. So he asked me to come back and go to UW. So I'm there for 3 years. I got to go back and forth a couple times. But when I was there for that 1.5 years, I actually got like a 5-year rent contract on an apartment. And I was just like, it's like $900 a year, to have this apartment. And so I was like, I'm going to rent it for 5 years because I'm going to get back from grad school and I'm just going to go straight back immediately. And I just couldn't wait to get back there. And everything in school, we're doing these different assignments on maternal and child health and learning about working in developing countries. And I would like get on my study groups and be like, hey, can we do it about Tibet? And they're like, okay. So I'm like, yes. So I would like do all this research about stuff going on there, and I would design all these like imaginary programs for like, mobile clinics in the remote areas and working on increasing prenatal care for women that have low access and like looking at different interventions for resuscitating newborns so that they don't lose as many babies. And anyways, I just was like, everything that I was learning was through the lens and through the framework of I'm going to be back in Tibet, like in just like, it's just weeks, compared to, as soon as I can, I'm going to be back there and I want to do this work there. And so also, in the context of that, when I was like, God was like, you need to go back to grad school, I was like, okay, if you're going to make me leave China and go to grad school, then these are my terms. I need a free place to live for 3 years, and you have to pay for school because I don't want to graduate with any debt because I want to get back to Tibet right away afterwards. These are my terms. And God's like, okay. So do you want to play like that? Like, okay. I'm going to say yes to that, but that means you have to wait on me for my way of doing that the whole time. And I'm going to pay for your school. I'm going to give you a free place to live. And you have to let me do it my way, though. because I thought like I'd probably like, if he was saying it, was like I'd get home and some like super generous person would be like, hey, we want to sponsor your whole education for 3 years, here's $100,000, you know? But instead it was like every quarter of school, I was down to like $5 to my name. And every time it was like, I'm enrolled in classes that I haven't paid for, and I'm like, where's it coming from, God? What are you going to do? Like, do you want me to get a loan out? Like, I'll take a loan out. He's like, you said you wouldn't. Like, I told you to wait for me. And every quarter, he provided in miraculous ways, every quarter. And it just seemed like every quarter the deficit was wider. Like, the first time was like I was $900 short for tuition. And then the next quarter, I'm like $3,000 short for tuition. The next quarter, $6,000. And there's a couple $6,000 quarters, I think. And then at the very end, I'm like I'm 2 quarters away from finishing, just about. And you guys have to understand, I was so obsessed with this idea. I mean, if you got that flavor, like I was so obsessed with this thing, I'm like, I'm going to be a midwife in China. Everyone who knew me, if they heard about anything on the radio connected to China, they're like, I wonder if Jenny Rose knows about that. Like, China and Jenny Rose were like synonymous in people's minds, because I was like, it's all I talked about. It's all I talked about. And by this time, I'd been going back and forth there for like, I don't know, 7 years or something. And so here I am, 6 months away from graduating. There's this whole story, like all this drama that's going on over in China, and I just feel like I'm just about, like, we're just on the cusp of like this huge breakthrough for Tibetan areas, and I'm watching all this stuff happen. And so many people had sown into my education, like really sacrificially. Like I had a priest from an Episcopal church and his wife that one day they're like, hey, we just got this new job at this new parish, and we want to give away our first paycheck, and we want to give it to you for school. It's $5,000. Like I had people that were giving like that level of like sowing into my education. And so a lot of them I didn't even ask for it, and God's just like, but to me it was like the only way I could even receive such generosity from people is because it wasn't really for me, it was for China, right? It's like, it's for the greater cause, right? The greater good, like all the women whose lives I'm going to save in Tibet, you know, whatever. And so here I am 6 months before I graduate, like practically my bags are packed, right, to get back there into my cool apartment that I've all set up over there. And God's like, hey, Jenny Rose, so this whole thing about China, I actually want you to lay it on the altar and let go. And I'm like, come again? Like, what? This is the one question everyone always asks me, like, what if God like changes his mind, or what if he sends you to something else? I'm like, he's not going to do that. Do you remember how there was an angel in the story? Like, it was that dramatic. Like, I know I'm supposed to be in China, and this is my journey into his heart, you know, whatever. And he's like, no, I want you to give China to me and lay that whole thing down. And I was like, do you know how close I am from graduating? Like, you can't be serious about this, you know? And the way it all came up is I was having like all these different like physical symptoms that were pointing to, like I was asking God about it, and he's like, said there was something about a vow, an inner vow that I had made. So I was asking him what it was, and talking to this person who was praying with me through it, and I was like, well, the only vow that I know for sure that I made was connected to China. She's like, okay, what's the vow? And I was like, well, it's just that I wasn't going to allow anyone or anything to get in the way of me fulfilling my call to China. Least of all marrying the wrong person or anything like that. Like I was just like, and so she listens to that and she's like, oh, interesting. She's like, this is pretty subtle. But do you hear yourself? I am not going to allow anyone to get in the way of me fulfilling my call to China. She's like, so when did it become your call and not God's? Right? And God was speaking to me and he's like, Jenny Rose, I just want to talk to you for a little while about your identity apart from China. And I'm like, I don't want to hear about that, actually. I like my identity connected to China, you know? And he's like, no, I want you to like, will you do this for me? Will you lay this down for me? And I can't even tell you guys, like, the earthquake that was going on inside of me, the thought of that. It was like, what about every person, like the thousands of people that I've talked to about this over the years? To be like, here I am, and all these people that have sown like tens of thousands of dollars into my education, into all my, like, supporting me when I was working overseas, like, as a missionary, all these things, like, to be like, oh, just kidding, guys, I'm not really going, you know, like, all that, nope. And I'm just like, God, did you notice how I even bothered to learn the language? Like, that was hard. And now you're saying, like, I'm not going back to China? What? Like, it was so, I can't even describe to you how intense that was for me to think of letting that go. Because at first I was like, okay, well, that's how it works, right? It's like Abraham and Isaac. Like, you lay it on the altar and then God gives it back to you, right? That's how it works every time. And so, of course, I can be like, sure, God, you can have China. But then, like, a week later, I'm like, holy moly, what if he was serious? What if I just gave God permission to send me to Oklahoma for 20 years if he wants? What if he's going to call me, like, to the American dream, which is actually secretly my nightmare? Like, what if he makes me stay in America the rest of my life? Like, it was just like, I can't even tell you how overwhelming that was. But he really wanted to talk to me about my identity apart from China and just really showed me that over time, like, even this precious, precious thing to me had become an idol, right? Like, my whole identity was built on this whole thing. And he was just like, listen, that's going to be damaging to you in the long run. Like, you're gonna end up serving that thing and becoming a slave to that thing instead of being free to do whatever I want you to do and go wherever I tell you to go. So I went on this journey, and I didn't realize, like, what he was showing me over that whole time is that in the context of building this identity around China, there was a lot of performance attached to it still for me. Even though there had been that, like, clarity moment where he was like, really, I just need you to be my friend, Like, there was still so much performance attached to it, right? Like, I'm going to sing for you in a little bit. I come from a whole family of musicians. We're all performers, and my family's pretty performance-oriented. And for me, like, I didn't realize how all these different things, like, I thought that I was free from that because I didn't care about all the, like, pictures of success that other people cared about, Like, I had, some of my favorite memories were, like, bumping around the mountains in Tibet in, like, a Beijing Jeep. Have any of you guys ever been in one of those? This was, like, the most, like, ratty Beijing Jeep. I mean, it's just like this poor missionary that I was driving with, like, she had to, like, manhandle the stick shift with, like, her whole strength to get it to shift into gear. And it was like every time we're, like, careening around these mountains, I'm like, we're gonna die. Like, this thing is gonna, like, bust into 100 pieces. And I was like, that's, like, my dream car. That's the kind of car I'm gonna be driving the rest of my life. I'm gonna be poor. I'm gonna be living on support, like, living on faith my whole life. I'm not gonna have any, like, like, the American dream was my nightmare, legitimately. I wanted to, like, I was like, I'm going to drive a broken down Beijing Jeep, and I'm going to just go around these mountains, and, like, I'm going to deliver babies on mountainsides by the light of the Beijing Jeep. It's going to be the most cool thing. And so I was just like, I didn't care about success the way anyone else defined it, So I thought I was doing pretty good. And God is just like, but you're building your identity around your minimalism. That's not even any better than building it around materialism. He's like, if you think you're better than everyone because you don't want the stuff that they want, it's still not life, right? It's still not like, and he's just like, what if I ask you to serve? Actually, the place that he sent me after he asked me to lay down China was California, Ventura, California. And I'm like, what? I was, like, looking over for a job there, and I'm like, the only places where I can get a job are, like, certain, what if I'm like, I don't want to be a midwife for movie stars? And he's like, why not? He's like, do those women deserve to be loved and cared for and labor less than the poor women in Tibet? Is it better, is it more noble to serve the poor than to serve the rich? And he just started exposing how all these things that I built my identity around were actually getting in the way of me loving people well wherever he had me go. And he's just reminding me of times when I was working as a nurse before I went to China, and I'd be walking down the halls, night shift, middle of the night, and there'd be, like, really hard things going on, women losing their babies, or, like, preterm birth, and, like, all these different, like, really traumatic things would be going on. They also did late-term abortions at that hospital. So there'd be sometimes really, like, intense things going on in the unit. And I'd walk back and forth and just be like, God, what do you need in a friend right now? Like, what do you need right now here at the hospital in a friend right now? And there'd be times when he'd just be like, I need you to be in the OR, I need you to be praying under your breath the whole time for the C-section. Or he'd be like, I need you to go into this room with this girl that has a choice that she has to make in the next 24 hours if she's going to keep this pregnancy or not, and I need you to pray with her. Or I need you to go and sit with this woman who's losing her twins at 22 weeks and they can't save them, and she's on the verge of dying of infection herself. I need you to go in there, and I want you to catch those babies as they come out and hold them. Or like this baby that's being aborted right now at 24 weeks in that room, I need you to be there to take the basin with the baby's body, and I need you to clean it and wrap it and prepare it for burial. Because I need a friend to actually look at that baby's face with me and celebrate that baby's life. Like, there'd be things like that that were like hardcore and intense, and he was just like, I just need you to be my friend, wherever it is, whoever it's for, if it's for the very least or the very highest in the society. Like, I need you to be free to do whatever I call you to do, to go wherever. Because he's like, the thing is, Jenny Rose, you don't even know what you're for yet. I told you that this was my chosen journey for you into my heart. You thought it was the end game. Really, it was just the on-ramp. It's just the beginning. And I have more to the story for you. You will always love the people of China. You will always love Tibetan families. Always. That's always going to be the beginning of your story. But he's like, I have more people for you to love too. And that journey with you into that place is precious to me. It's precious to me. I'm not mad at you for, the different ways that it became part of your identity in a way that's not helpful for you, but this is a precious journey to me. But even more important than the day that I called you to this is the day I'm asking you to lay it down and trust it to me. Because that's what I need in a friend, that I can ask of you anything, the most precious thing of all, and you won't hold back, and you'll say yes, no matter what. That's what I want from you. Will you be a friend to me like that? Because then it's not about what you can imagine in your head, it's about what I can imagine. And you're free to do what I can imagine for you in ways that you could never see coming. So that was 3.5 years ago now, I want to say. And yeah, I did lay down this call to China, and as far as I know, about a year and a half later, I went back, and the same timing I was planning to move back into my apartment, I went and packed everything up, actually gave most of it away, and closed up my apartment there and said goodbye, and knew I wouldn't even be back there to visit for 2 to 3 more years. Still think about it every day, still miss it. But he's just opening up so much for me, you guys. I just can't even, what I'm doing now, and just the nations that he's bringing to me, and the ways that he's using this whole experience in China, it comes together in ways that it just boggles my mind all the time. But I remember feeling a special measure of shame at that time when he asked me to let go of it because of what people would think, Because I got actually a lot of pretty positive attention for being the China girl, you know what I mean? Because it's kind of impressive, she speaks this language, she laid everything down, she's so passionate, whatever. It's people just, I was the poster child for devotion to God and living abandoned, whatever. And so that was also kind of yeah, I'm a pretty good Christian, But to actually hard stop, I'm not going back and telling everyone that, it was really intense. And especially the provision around school, that was really hard for me to swallow. Because also the next quarter, I needed $14,000 in one quarter to pay for school. And I was I have $1,000. So I don't even know how I'm going to pay for school the last quarter. And the thought of even receiving any money from anybody, now that I'm not even going back to China, it just felt I don't know, it felt like stealing or something at that point. I was just there's no way, how is this going to work out? And this couple that I was living with at the time, they had been so generous to me. They let me live there for 2 years, rent-free, incredible. And Betty comes up to me one day and she's like, how much do you need for school next quarter? She just asked me. She thought someone had given me a grocery card because I was down to $5 again in the world. And someone had given me some Safeway money to buy groceries. And she's like, what's this, Jenny Rose? I'm like, grocery money? She's like, do you need that right now? I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, what do you need for school next year? It's or next quarter. I was a lot of money, my last quarter. She's like, well, how much? I'm like, I'm not even going to tell you, Betty. I'm not even going to tell you. It's a lot. But God's going to take care of it somehow. I don't know how, but she's like, how much do you need? I'm like, $14,000 in one quarter. And she's like, Jenny Rose, how are you going to come up with that? What? And I'm like, I don't know, but, he's done it all this time. I don't know how he's going to do it, but somehow. And meanwhile, I'm just wrestling with, no one better give me any money for this because I'm not even going to China, And about 2 weeks later, she sends me this text message, and she's like, I talked to Steve, we'll pay for school, we love you. And they legit wrote me a check for $14,000. And I was so messed up by that, you guys. Like, I was just like, I just was sitting at a piano just by myself, and I'm just like crying. I'm like, God, I don't even know what to do with this kind of generosity. I don't know what to do with this. And he's like, Jenny Rose, what if I'm just providing for you and paying for your school because you're my daughter? And because I said that I would. And not because of all the things that you're going to do for me as a result of having this degree. What if it's worth it to me to provide for you just because I promised? And because you're mine. And you having this education and having this dream of your heart to be a midwife, like, that's worth it to me to invest in you, regardless of where that takes you. What about that? And it just was like, I could just see, like, oh my gosh, it's not about what we think it's about, you know? It's not about what we think it's about. Like, in ministry or whatever he's asked you to do vocationally, it's like you can have this whole picture of what you think it's about, and God's like, really, for me, this whole journey is about you discovering your royalty to me. This is about intimacy with me and watching me come through for you in ways that you never could imagine or plan. And this is about you knowing your identity that as just my kid, regardless of what you can do for me, regardless of how you can perform for me, regardless of how impressive it looks to other people. I just want you to be my kid. I just want you to be my friend. And all the other stuff, I just leave it up to me. And then he's just free to use me however he wants. So yeah, he paid for my school. Got through debt-free, the doctorate. Who does that? That was amazing. But I was asking him around that time, I was like, God, if you knew all along that you were going to ask me to let go of this, like, why the whole 8 years old thing? Like, why did you call me so dramatically when I was so little? If you knew the whole time, I was just going to have to lay it down eventually, you know? And so sweet, he just said, Jenny Rose, like, I knew that down the road there would be times when you felt like completely inadequate, just like you did when you were 20 at the house of prayer. And like, I'm the wrong person for this, I'm not qualified for this, I'm not the right choice for this for whatever reason. He's like, I knew there'd be moments like that when you felt like it was too big for you. And I knew there'd be moments also on the flip side where you felt like you knew what you were doing. Like, I have a doctorate now, I have all this education, I've been to all these conferences, I've had all this experience, whatever. And you'd be tempted to rely on your own strength. But he's like, I called you when you were 8 years old because I wanted you always to have that to go back to, that I called you when you were just a kid, when you were little and your body was even broken and you had nothing to offer me except a willing heart. And that's all I ever want from you, is that willing heart. And if that's what you have, no matter what vocation you're going into, like, then I'm free to use you however I want, you know? And so this is a song I want to sing for you guys that I wrote like half of it. Some of it was from a worship leader at IHOP. And then I kind of added my own verses to it to make it my own. If I go like a couple minutes past 3, is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm winding down, just singing. So this song is kind of like an anthem for me. It's called Simple Melody. And then there's another worship song I feel like I might want to sing for you guys. Is this on? So I just want to sing this really as a prayer for you guys. I don't know any of your stories. I wish I knew all of them. Maybe I'll get to it at some point. And I don't know where God's taking you, but maybe some of you are in that place where you feel like, He's asking you to use something that's too big for you, or that you're intimidated about, or you don't feel like you have what it takes, or dealing with just kind of that sense of needing to perform, you know? We can take that into our faith so easily, you guys. It's just so insidious. It's so part of our culture, you know, that it's just like you have to be the best, or you have to do the most amazing, extraordinary things, you know? It's like, I look back on my life and all of the most profound moments, even in China, and my most precious memories of things that happened were things I was never looking for. That just kind of like, I just tripped into them in the context of walking with him. And that's what he has for all of you. And so I just want to a simple melody in my weak offering, my life of barrenness and my heart of brokenness. It moves heaven and it stirs heaven, yes, it moves heaven and it stirs heaven. say I love you just the way you are. It's not about what you can bring, it's not about what you can do. I just love you. I just love you. Just want to invite you to just think about the gifts that you have, the things that God's given you to do, the passions that you have, even the stuff that's just from Him. Just picture yourself laying it down, and Him just putting it aside and being like, but you, your face, just your smile, how beautiful you are to me, just receiving His love there. Philippians 3, Paul goes through this whole list talking about putting confidence in the flesh. He says, listen, if anyone thinks they have reason to put confidence in the flesh, I have one. Circumcised on the 8th day, the people of Israel of the tribe of Benjamin, the Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee as for zeal, persecuting the church as for legalistic righteousness, faultless. But whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may be found in Him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God and is through faith. I want to know Christ and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in His suffering, becoming like Him in His death, so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. Not that I've already obtained this or have already been made perfect, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus has taken hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I don't consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. I used to think that whole counting everything as lost was just like all those external things, you know, like the car, the money, the prestige, or like the degrees, or what people see on the outside. But God's like, what about the inside things? What about the things that are precious to you, even the things that I gave you? What about the passions of your heart? Would you consider those lost too? Would you consider those to be like rubbish too, compared to just the gift of knowing me? Stop striving. You don't have to perform for me. You don't have to perform for me. All I want from you is just to offer me your willing heart. Just be my friend. have given everything my heart could ever need, and all you ask is that I am resting safe inside your promise to provide, and nothing could ever change your love for me. Thank you for your love, Jesus. We just want you, Lord. We're so honored that you would use us at all, God, in this amazing mission on your heart to save the lost, God. That you would want us as companions for you on that journey, God. I thank you that you have an on-ramp for each one of us into your heart, into understanding your affection, God. Save us from the trap, God, of feeling like we have to do something to deserve it or earn it or prove it, God. I just speak freedom over every young man and woman in this room, God. So just walk in the joy of just being with you. Come what may, God. No matter where you're going to send us, God, no matter who you're going to put in our path, God. Just have that freedom just to be yours. Let you be the one that's doing all the heavy lifting. Nothing to prove, nothing to earn. Amen. Thanks for your patience. I went